Yeah. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this expert panel. My name is Hermann Lotze-Kampen. I'm an agricultural economist and department head at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research and professor at Humboldt University in Berlin. I co-organized this panel together my two colleagues with Katharina Ruggeri-Laderchi and Christine Chemnitz and Harald Gaete from Agora Agrar. So it's the panel is on the future role of agriculture and forestry in a sustainable food system and bioeconomy. We have 4 presentations. We had a slight change in plans because of cancellations. So originally we were expecting the European Young Farmers Union to be represented here. They had to cancel, unfortunately, but since I'm coming from a farm and my nephew is about to take over the family farm right now, I just try to bring in the young farmer's perspective later in the discussion. In between, we also had a request by the Danish Minister for the Green Transformation to give an input. He also had to cancel, but interestingly, on Tuesday, I was at the BMUV Agrar Congress, and there a high representative from the Danish Ministry for Green Transformation, which has been established in October last year, was there. So I know a little bit about what Denmark is up to, so I can try to bring that perspective as well in the discussion. So we'll have 4 presentations, which we'll hear all in a row. We will have 3 presentations on scenario modeling studies, big ones, and then a perspective from the EU Commission. And then we'll engage here in a panel discussion, summarizing the talks, and I will also allow for questions from the audience. So without further ado, we'll get into the presentations, and we'll start with Katharina Ruggeri-Laderchi, who is the director of the Food System Economics Commission, where I also was heavily involved. We published a big report about a year ago. And remember, a year ago we were here and the farmers protesting out with the tractors on the diesel fuel subsidies and so on. So I think now we are looking at future scenarios, what could happen in a sustainable bioeconomy. And this is, of course, very relevant to provide future new perspectives also for farmers, but also quite a lot of challenges. So Katharina will start with the first presentation, and then we'll go through the program. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Herman, for introducing me. So what I'm going to do is to give you some general insights from the Food System Economics Commission Global Policy Report, and particularly focus on this idea of trade-offs, as you will see. And so just to give you a super quick introduction, this was the Food System Economics Commission, independent panel of food sustainability experts, of food systems and sustainability experts, tasked with this big ambition of creating a little bit the Stern report for food, so looking at the costs and benefits of transforming food systems. And Herman was one of our commissioners, and other faces might be familiar. Ottmar Edenhofer, Ravi Kamber, and Vera Songwe were our co-chairs. And the Commission has created a big body of research that you can find online on our website at foodsystemeconomics.org. So this is the advertising part of the presentation. But this big program has been really summarized in the messages that I have in this slide, on the idea that the transforming food systems is necessary, is possible, is hugely beneficial, and also not easy. And really what I think the biggest part of what I have to say is on that not easy part. Because we know, if you think of the need of transforming food systems to meet food security, sustainability, and health goals, and the role of the bioeconomy in supporting that transformation, there are clearly big trade-offs that need to be negotiated. And an obvious one is about land. Are you using land for nature-based solutions? Are you using it for the bioeconomy? Are you using it to feed people? Are you feeding the animals that people eat? Those are big decisions that need to be, what you decide there determines pretty much the trajectory on which you are. But I think even more importantly, there are big trade-offs in terms of winners and losers. When you're talking about a transformation as big as the one that we have in mind, there will be people who will gain and people that we will lose. There will be big redistributional impacts for food prices, for example, that need to be negotiated. And I think that in the past, we haven't really taken that dimension into account. We've focused a lot on what ought to be done, and perhaps we haven't focused as much in advocating for the right way of doing it. And this trying to integrate this, not only the policy dimensions, but the political economy dimensions, I think has been one of the areas on which the Food System Economics Commission really tried to make a contribution. So just very quickly, we know that food systems are the nexus of some of the biggest challenges that humanity faces right now: the climate crisis, the nature crisis, the epidemics of non-communicable diseases linked to food consumption. So this needs to be addressed by transforming food systems. The work that the Potsdam Institute did in modeling scenario pathways up to 2050 shows that even under pretty optimistic and I think increasingly optimistic assumptions on what the future would look like, in 2050 the situation would still be very far from where we would want to be. So we need to change food systems, and we know that it is possible to do that. But, there is, despite lots of very technical debates on particular aspects of this transformation, there's really a consensus on what needs to be changing. And we know that we need to change what we eat. We need to guarantee stronger livelihoods to those working on food systems. We know that we need to protect land and restore land that has been degraded. We need to move production, that's all the production, not just the agriculture, to sustainable ways of producing. All of these things together would already contribute to increase the resilience of food systems. We also need to focus on specific interventions there. So it's not that we don't have solutions. We know that they will look very different in different contexts. And one thing which I think is important is that we didn't try to identify a one-size-fits-all policy recipe for everybody. But we know that those solutions exist. And in the pathways that our colleagues at PIC have modeled, it is possible to reverse these really negative outcomes that we all have in mind. It is possible, as you can see in this slide, to turn food systems into net sink by 2040. It is possible to eliminate undernutrition, to cut down the numbers of people affected by non-communicable diseases and so on. So this can be done. We know what are the things that can be done. And we also really focused on trying to estimate what would be the benefits of that transformation. And we've done that in two ways. You see, you have these pretty astounding numbers, 5 to 10 trillion a year. And this is the average benefit between now and 2050 as obtained with our pathways. And this has been, the range comes from having used two different approaches to that. The 10 trillion is a social welfare approach that has calculated also the benefits basing, basically looking at the prosperity impacts on what happens to the benefits on the whole income distribution. The lower bound has been obtained in a different way by using a hidden cost analysis. You might have seen it also in recent reports by the FAO. We're very proud that we have developed the methodology that the FAO has then used for its flagship publications this year and last year. And so it has a narrower definition of benefits, and that's why you have a lower estimate. But to be honest, I mean, the key point is the economics of this is very clear. This is something which would bring incredible benefits if it were applied. And here we just give you a sense of what applying, in our transformation scenario, this is what the hidden cost reduction would look like. And I think a really important part of this is the bottom area, the blue one, on the benefits that would accrue from changing diets. And we kind of, in the modeling, the transformational diets comes in gradually, which is why in the beginning, it's first basically the environmental measures that are bringing benefits, and then or actually are reducing costs. And then it's the diets that are basically kicking in. And I think one of the biggest messages that comes out from our pathway analysis is that over 2/3 of the benefits of the transformation would come from transforming diets. Because of course, if you're transforming what people eat, you're also transforming what gets produced. And so it's basically a kind of intervention which acts on both the demand and the supply side with great benefits. The report has identified what we call priorities, but you could call them entry points. They could be, they're generally 5 areas in which we think you could start by intervening. Diets, as I mentioned, is a key one. It's also a very hard one. The other ones are really to do with changing the incentives that regulate the way food system works, repurposing subsidies, changing what is supported by government policy, targeting, introducing new taxes and targeting the benefits of those taxes to make sure that you're compensating those that are negatively affected. A big emphasis on innovation, both diffusing existing innovations. We know already that there is a lot out there that could be brought to scale and have really transformational impact. And I really would like to emphasize this, ensuring no one is left behind. But so, as I mentioned, what I wanted to spend just a little bit more time on is this idea of managing the trade-offs. And we try to say, okay, there is this agenda. In a way, it's kind of intuitive. What we need to do is start producing differently, producing better, consuming differently. But the political dimension of this, like the farmers that last year were in the streets, that is really what we need to think of. How are we going to ensure that there is a consensus and that these measures are not just like technocratic measures, but things that can be implemented? And so we've looked at lots of examples of change, and I think that this is our 5-point recipe, and it would be perhaps in the discussions we can come back on, how easily you can do this. But I think the one thing you need to have a constituency for change. It seems pretty obvious, but you need to create on the ground a group of people who actually want to support what you're doing. If you think of the Inflation Reduction Acts in the US, the hope now is that even the overall pathway in which the US is very likely going to be different, they have created enough people that have invested in new technologies to create a constituency for change, so that even if policy change, these people, they might be the ones that drive change. And this might involve very often, I think that's another thing that you see in other examples of change, it might require aligning interests that apparently seem to be very, very different. One important thing is the governance aspects of this. Just say if you look at lots of countries, they have, because food systems are dependent from so many bits of government, from so many regulatory agencies and so on, is very possible that what these different entities are doing is actually not coherent. One of our commissioners had this interesting example of a country that both subsidizes sugar and taxes sugar. This seems crazy, but it's actually a lot of what we do. A lot of the legislative and regulatory environment is characterized by this type of thing. So, for example, you might say, okay, I give subsidized credits for sustainable agriculture, but then you don't enforce the sustainability standards. This is one of the major BRIC countries that does that. You don't enforce the sustainability standards, and so you end up subsidizing actively deforestation. So there is a lot of this, and you need to find governance structures that allow you to bring together all the players, and also that allow people to have different groups with competing views to be represented. There is a really important role for creating narratives and sharing information about change. So say, I think there is some statistics on the very low percentage of people, or those who care actually about, in the general public, I think something like less than 10% of the people who care about climate change realize that food is a major contributor to climate change. So there is obviously a lot that can be done, even by academic efforts like the Commission, to kind of put out messages to let people know and to make them reflect on the implications of their consumption choices. And I think there is a lot to do with policy design to kind of to make sure that there are elements which kind of take care of this complex distributional impacts. So, there are examples, for example, of carbon taxes that then, where the benefits are kind of equally distributed to give everybody a stake in the policies continuing. And finally, I think there is a lot to do in terms of transparency and taking governments and businesses accountable for what they have set out to do. So it's a very rich agenda, and I'd love to talk to you more during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katharina. And we move on to the second talk, which is by Christine Chemnitz and Harald Grete, both co-directors of Agora Agrar, a think tank in Berlin on agriculture and food. And it's basically a joint presentation. So Christine will give the presentation, and Harald will later engage in the panel discussion. So Christine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hermann. And we already joked about it, that I didn't share with Harald what I'm going to present now, and he has to answer all your questions then later on. I'm happy to present some of the results of a study we published last year in autumn with the title Agriculture, Forestry and Food in a Climate-Neutral EU. The land use sectors as part of a sustainable food system and the bioeconomy. So it perfectly fits to this workshop, and the objective of the study is to show that agriculture, forestry in the EU can contribute substantially to sustainability objectives, such as, on the one hand, climate neutrality, second, biodiversity protection in agriculture areas, but as well in forests, while at the same time allowing healthy diets for EU citizens, producing more biomass than today for the bioeconomy, avoiding leakage to non-EU countries, and this was of particular importance for us. So we wanted to show with our study that this could work. And to tell you already in advance, yes, our scenario and calculation shows it could work if we all make a huge effort and if we have the right policy incentives. And just to bring it down or boil it down to one sentence, this is possible if land is used efficiently and biomass, this includes food, is consumed sustainably. What did we do? Very briefly, we sketched out a future scenario for agriculture, forestry, food and biomass demand in the bioeconomy, in large parts a quantitative scenario. We used a quantitative model, Capri, in order to ensure the consistency of our assumptions and to derive some economic and environmental results. Thirdly, we did a lot of site calculations, particularly for the woody biomass and the greenhouse gas emissions. Let me now come to the results related to the bioeconomy. I show you 3 slides. This is the first one, showing that greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture production and agriculturally used peatlands between 2020 and 2045 can be reduced substantially. The 3 main blocks you can see them on the left-hand side for 2020 and on the right-hand side for 2045. The purple lower part is the livestock sector. And through restructuring the livestock sector, on the one hand, through using mitigation technologies, but as well through keeping less livestock in numbers, you can reduce substantially the emissions from the livestock sector. But at the same time, please remember we said we don't want to put our sustainability efforts on the shoulders of other countries. That only works when we consume less livestock products. So the most important thing is here to think about how do we come, and you already mentioned that in your presentation already, how do we manage to establish an ambitious food policy as well, that people consume more plant-based diets. Secondly, low-emission fertilization, and thirdly, a major block as well and a major potential, the re-wettening of agriculturally used peatlands, currently used drained. This is only 2% of the agricultural land, but nearly 20% of the agriculture and agricultural land use emissions. So substantially potential to reduce that. The reduction of consumption in livestock does not only offer benefits when it comes to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. It as well provides benefit when it comes to how do we use our land. So the second graph I want to show is the land use patterns. On the left-hand side, again, 2020 and then 2045, our scenario. And I just want to highlight two things. In order to stabilize the climate contribution of forests, we assume in our study that we slightly reduce wood harvest in forests. At the same time, we assume that the wood demand increases substantially, up to 20%, because of the bioeconomy. So what we show here, and unfortunately I don't know where the pointer is here, so you see this darker brown bar there with 4% lignocellulosic crops. And this is important because part of our scenario is that we assume the production of woody structures on agricultural land. On the one hand, to close the gap between the reduced harvest and the increasing demand for woody biomass. Secondly, that comes with the opportunity to produce negative emissions on agricultural land. And thirdly, woody structures on agricultural land as well can provide semi-natural landscape features for the protection of biodiversity. So even though these 4% in total or 8% of the agricultural land is a major effort, it is worth it because it comes with several benefits. And secondly, I would just like to highlight this very small blue bar, which is a re-wetted peatland. In the graph before, I highlighted only 2% of the agricultural land, but the potential to reduce 20% of the agricultural and agriculturally used peatlands emissions. And this land is no longer available for the production of food, but it is available for the production of biomass through the production of paludicultures. And for that, we need as well the right incentives that it makes as well sense for farmers to produce or to use their land in a wet way. And with that, I come to the next graph, and here you see the comparison between the demand and supply of biomass, which we assume in our study. On the left-hand side, already still the 2020 versions, and then on the right-hand side, our scenario. And what you can see is that we slightly reduce the biomass supply from forests, that we slightly as well reduce the biomass supply from co-products from forests. But then you see this orange bar, and the light blue bar, which I already described, which are the two new established land use patterns, the woody structures on agricultural land, which come with negative emissions, and the paludiculture production. On the right-hand side, you see the demand side. This is on the one hand, already you can see here that currently we consume biomass much more for energetic use than for material use. This is not the smartest way to use biomass. This is why we assume an increase in biomass demand mainly from material use. This needs the right incentives, for example, from the construction sector, and a slight decrease in energetic use. How would we get to this kind of scenario? Just mentioning 5 major blocks. We recommend a climate policy for the land use sectors at EU level. We recommend a very targeted spending of the money from the current common agricultural policy to reward farmers for producing the public goods. We think it would be important to establish a legislative framework for promoting sustainable food systems. And as I said, sustainable consumption patterns are not only important with regard to food consumption, but as well with regard to biomass consumption. And this year, the EU Commission will review its EU bioeconomy strategy, so we would always recommend to have an EU biomass action plan to foster or incentivize material use. And I leave it with that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christine. Very nice. I should say, interestingly enough, these two studies you saw now, the modeling results were developed almost in parallel, but completely independently. And it was very interesting. I mean, I'm also a modeler, and we were already sitting together, two modeling teams, and we started to compare our results for Europe. I mean, this study focuses on Europe, the FSEC study on the global level. And really independently, we arrived at some surprisingly similar results. I mean, there are all kinds of specifics where we differ, but that was really reassuring in terms of robustness of these outcomes. But we'll come to the challenges later. So this is a very good start. We now have a third study to be presented. We have William Sutton here from the World Bank, lead agricultural specialist there, and he will give us an insight into the Recipe for a Livable Planet study by the World Bank. And yeah, that I think fits very well to the other studies as well. So Bill, we're looking forward to your input.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thanks very much to the organizers for the opportunity to be here and present this work. So you've heard already a couple of really interesting presentations on food system transformation at the global level, food system transformation at the EU level. I'm going to talk now about one aspect of food system transformation that we think is really critical, but has been an underserved, underexamined area, and that is the emissions produced by the global agri-food system and how to mitigate them. This is a study that we produced that came out recently, Recipe for a Livable Planet, Achieving Net Zero Emissions in the Agri-Food System. As far as we know, this is so far the most comprehensive global strategy on climate change mitigation in the global agri-food system. I was actually here a year ago, and we organized a session around this, but the report wasn't out yet, so we couldn't actually present the results. So it's out now as of a few months, and there's a 320-page report behind this, so I invite everyone, if you're interested in this topic, there's a QR code to download the full report and have a look at that. So the first point that I think is really critical is, why are we interested in agri-food system emissions? This is a question we often get. There's this perception that agriculture is a victim of climate change and we should be focused on adaptation, resilience building. But the reality is that the agri-food system is actually caught in a vicious circle, and adaptation alone is not going to be sufficient to feed the world. So we're increasing our agri-food activities all the time to feed a growing global population. That contributes to increased greenhouse gas emissions, which contribute to global heating, which adversely affects agricultural yields. Then to compensate for that reduction in yields, we further increase our agricultural activities, which yet again generate more greenhouse gases and so on. So in effect, we're sort of chasing a moving target that we're moving through our own actions, and instead we need to try to break this vicious circle by scaling up both adaptation and mitigation action and create a more sustainable food system that can both feed the world and heal the planet. One of the key points we make is that greenhouse gas emissions from the agri-food system are significantly higher than what was previously thought. And we do take a food systems approach. So the bar you see on the left, that represents total annual global emissions economy-wide. The yellow shaded portion, that's agri-food emissions. Those are about 16 gigatons or 16 billion tons of CO2 equivalent in greenhouse gas emissions every year. That's almost a third of total greenhouse gas emissions. To put that into perspective, that's 1/6 more than the emissions from all global electricity and heat generation every year. So it's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. The pie chart to the right then breaks that down by different categories and sources of emissions in the agri-food system. The orange shaded areas, that's farm gate emissions, what we normally think of as crop and livestock production. That's the biggest category at about 45%, but that's still less than half the total in food system emissions. The second biggest category in blue is the pre and post production processes. These are really critical. That's everything from your upstream fertilizer production, pesticide production, to downstream transport, processing, household consumption, onto food loss and waste. Those are about a third of total agri-food system emissions. And then finally in green, which is also important, is land use change. And there are some important implications of this, in particular, that in order to really get a grip on this issue and find solutions, we need to take a food systems approach that looks at the whole agri-food system. The next point that I think is really important to understand is that without significant climate mitigation action in the agri-food system, the Paris Agreement goals cannot be reached. So this figure is a simplified version of a chart that we have in the report. It shows projected cumulative global emissions pathways between now and the end of the century, and our likelihood of achieving the Paris Agreement targets of 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius. The red line at the top, that's what's projected to happen if we have 100% non-food mitigation by 2075. In other words, we eliminate all emissions from all the other sectors, but we continue with business as usual in the agri-food system. Those agri-food system emissions alone would be enough to drive the planet past the 1.5 degree target, and even the 2 degree target would be in serious jeopardy. So instead, what we need to aim for is represented by the green line at the bottom. That is 100% non-food mitigation, as well as 100% agri-food mitigation by 2050. So essentially, we need to achieve net zero emissions in the agri-food system by 2050 to have a better than 50% chance of meeting the Paris Agreement targets, and thus the theme of our report. Another, I think, interesting finding that is surprising to a lot of people, we carry out the analysis and recommendations in the report by World Bank country income categories, low, middle, and high income countries. So this figure presents the agri-food system emissions for those different country income categories, both for 30 years ago and today. And what we find is, as you can see in the middle, that the middle income countries are responsible for over 2/3 of agri-food emissions at around 68%. In contrast, high income countries are responsible for about 21% of agri-food emissions. And finally, low income countries are only responsible for about 11% of agri-food system emissions. So there's a tendency to look at this issue from the perspective of, the global north and global south, but there's this really critical third category, the middle income countries, that don't often get talked about. This has a number of important implications. First of all, in order to really address this challenge, we have to focus efforts on middle income countries. Second, that as you can see, those blue shaded areas, again, that's those pre and post production processes I talked about earlier, the value chain emissions. That's the fastest growing category of greenhouse gas emissions in the agri-food system. So we have to look beyond the farm for solutions. And finally, low-income countries, we need to help them to avoid the mistakes of the past. But there is good news, and that is that the agri-food system we find is a huge untapped source of low-cost climate action. This chart essentially represents our recipe for a livable planet. We find that cost-effective mitigation can cut agri-food emissions by over 16 gigatons per year by 2050 and get us to net zero. The yellow bar on the left, that again is those 16 gigatons of agri-food system emissions. And then to the right of that in the cascading colored bars, that's the cost-effective mitigation potential in each of the country income categories from actions in land use change, on-farm, and also pre- and post-production. As I mentioned earlier, around 2/3 of agri-food system emissions are coming from the middle-income countries, but even more of the cost-effective mitigation potential is there. 3/4 of the cost-effective mitigation potential is actually in those middle-income countries. The technologies to achieve this are readily available. Some, like more efficient use of fertilizers and water, are actually cost-saving. And finally, we find that there's no inherent trade-off between mitigation on the one hand and food security on the other. And that is, to a large extent, because of agriculture's unique ability to provide triple-win solutions that can reduce emissions, increase resilience to climate change, and also increase productivity. Given the theme of this forum, we thought that it would be useful to talk about some things, some transformational changes in forestry and agriculture that contribute to climate action that are relevant for the bioeconomy. One, forestry, ag production drives 25 to 33% of forest loss. Cost-effective land use mitigation could actually avoid around 6.5 gigatons of CO2 equivalent in emissions per year. Soil management can sequester 2 to 5 gigatons of carbon annually. Livestock, there's potential for 30% emission reduction through improved productivity and resource use efficiency in the livestock sector. Intermediate water application can reduce emissions from rice by 15 to 45%. More generally, climate-smart agriculture could generate economic returns between 27% and 126%, and cost-effectively reduce emissions. And then in terms of value chain emissions, there's a real need to scale up use of renewable energy in the agri-food system, which is currently much lower than in other sectors. And the details of these numbers are in the report. At the same time, there's a huge financing gap in the agri-food system. The agriculture and food only receives about 4% of total global climate finance, despite its importance, and only around 2% of mitigation finance. The tiny green circles at the bottom, that's the climate finance going to ag and food compared to the big blue universe of financing. We estimate that financing has to increase by about 18 times to $260 billion a year to put us on a path to net zero. That sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money. However, we find that the potential benefits of that could be up to $4.3 trillion a year in terms of health, environmental, and economic benefits. And at least 25 to 30% of that cost could be covered by repurposing public resources that are currently being spent on agricultural subsidies that aren't contributing to sustainability. And finally, this recipe is doable. Every country can contribute, and we lay out recommendations by country income category for high, middle, and low income countries. I see I'm running out of time, so I don't have time to go into all the details. But again, you can find this on our website, and there's a QR code. Download the full report, and it's also, the overview has been translated into 6 additional languages besides English. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Very nice Bill requested to be on our panel and how well it fits, right, to this program. You saw 3 studies now, and to put a bridge between the first and the third talk, you talked about necessary investments of something $200–300 billion per year. You know, in FSEC we came up with something between $200 and $500 billion per year for incentivizing or pushing the transformation, versus the gains. You talked about 4 trillion, so that's times 10, right? 4 trillion. Katarina talked about 5 to 10 trillion. So this is the whole story. If you want to think in terms of a cost-benefit ratio, you know, it's a big investment, yes, but the gains to be had in health benefits and everything are close to 10 times bigger than that. So I think that's a very clear story, and also quite a bit of overlaps in the studies. So a lot of material you heard. Before I forget, in the end, I was told we are getting a video recording of the whole session, so this will later be put up on the GFFA website or a YouTube link, so, you know, for people to get into that later if they want. And now as a fourth talk, we get an input from the policy side, the policy perspective. From the EU level, we have Peter Werheim, who is head of bioeconomy and food systems at DG Research in the EU. And Peter, the floor is yours for a policy perspective on these issues. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Hermann. I also have a nephew who is a farmer and a trained farmer. But we also heard this morning in another panel also already examples of how farmers can take forward the bioeconomy and how they can benefit from the bioeconomy. The 3 studies which were presented, I would call bioeconomy studies. I would like to explain why and connect this with policies. Those who have been in the panel this morning might have seen some of the slides, but I would like to start out again with a very basic point. Namely, what is the definition of the bioeconomy? And for me, for us in the European Union, the understanding is that it's all sectors that produce, process, use biomass, which is a renewable and biological resource, including also nature-based solutions and ecosystem services. And hence, if you take that definition, it includes what you call the agri-food systems. It includes agriculture. It includes also forestry. It even includes also fisheries and aquaculture. That is a first important point to memorize. And the second point is that bioeconomy is a concept that came out of research, and it was significantly supported through research. By adding research and innovation into this equation, you can stimulate ways of utilizing biomass in a more nature-friendly way. You can utilize biomass in a more efficient, more resource-efficient way, and therefore, and also you can through innovation also create new products. This increases the opportunity space for farmers, for foresters, but also for many others, and thereby also contributes to socio-economic dimension. If you have this wide understanding of the bioeconomy in the EU is also a very important sector, has socio-economic relevance in terms of employment, GDP. A study at the University of Wageningen indicated if you include the services in the EU, it has a size even of 10%, but it also has a very significant innovation potential through these bio-based products. For instance, if you take textiles, many of the textiles we are wearing are either from plastic or they are from cotton. Both have high climate negative footprint or environmental footprint. And there are also, for instance, bio-based textiles available today, and they are on the market from cellulosis, from wood-based products. So there are innovation possibilities to create completely new products, and this is another strong argument of the bioeconomy. In the EU, we have a tradition of an EU bioeconomy policy. It started all out from research and innovation long before 2010. We invested significant money through the framework program for research and innovation from the European Union into bioeconomy innovation. And this was the starting point also to work on a bioeconomy strategy. The first one was adopted in 2012 with a focus on bio-based industries, technology, but then in 2018 we updated that strategy together with DG Environment, together with DG Agriculture and other services at the Commission. We are implementing a whole of government approach. All different ministries are working together on this. We have also then developed a progress report on the 2018 strategy, and towards the end of this year, in 2025, under the mandate of the new Commission, we are planning to also come forward with a new bioeconomy strategy. From a conceptual point of view, already in the 2018 strategy, we have argued that the bioeconomy is a cross-sectorial solution provider. We have these 5 objectives on the upper left-hand side, from food security to managing natural resources sustainably, reducing dependence on non-renewable resources, mitigating, adapting to climate change, and also strengthening European competitiveness, looking at all 3 dimensions of sustainability. And hence, we also need integrated studies like the studies you have presented to underpin also the ways forward. Let me also mention that, and all of you, or most of you might know that in the European Union, in Brussels, we have a new European Commission which took office in early December. This slide shows our President, Ursula von der Leyen, with some of the priorities that she has given us. Clean Industrial Deal, Circular Economy, Biotech Act, Vision for Agriculture and Food, Life Science Strategy, Bioeconomy Strategy, continuation and implementation of the Green Deal. These elements will be pursued. On the bioeconomy side, we have 3 commissioners that are already very much involved. Jessica Roswall, the Swedish commissioner for the environment, water resilience, will take the lead also on the update of the bioeconomy strategy. My commissioner, Commissioner for Startups, Research, Innovation, Zacharyeva, will contribute to it, but also Commissioner Hansen, who is here also at the Green Week, who is responsible for agriculture and food, will make an important contribution to this. And now let me also mention, for the update of the bioeconomy strategy, I think what we have is a solid foundation. We have done a progress report which was adopted in 2022, which took stock of to which extent did we deliver on our bioeconomy strategy and what are the gaps. And let me just mention a few elements of what we have delivered. On the one hand, we see that within the European Union you have 12 member states who have dedicated bioeconomy strategies. You have also regions, you even have municipalities like Stuttgart in Germany who have bioeconomy strategies in the meantime. That means bioeconomy is very much also depending on regional, local circumstances. We also have done a lot to develop the bioeconomies in Central and Eastern Europe, where they have a lot of potential through a BioEast initiative. And the third point is related that we have to the fact that we have also created a public-private partnership through which investments into further research and innovations in food and bio-based industries, biomanufacturing industries has been increased. And this is a very important driver for innovation around the use of renewable biomass. Here are just a few examples of innovative startups and companies. Like in the middle, you see Nasikomo, a Bulgarian startup which is growing the black soldier fly to produce protein, oil fertilizer for the feed agriculture industries. Or you see on the right-hand side also Infinite Roots. They also have a stand here in the auditorium, who are producing through precision fermentation and using mycelium, the next generation of sustainable alternative proteins. So you see there are close connections also to food systems, but there are also other examples which I skipped. We have this public-private partnership called Circular Bio-Based Europe, with which we have also supported modern, sustainable biorefineries to use biomass better and in a more resource-efficient way. For instance, we have biorefineries that are utilizing secondary wood waste to create new products, bio-based products. That is very important. The bio-based industries are an important element, but not everything. They are complemented with many other sustainability aspects. And one critical aspect, of course, is to ensure that we have sufficient sustainably produced biomass, and that demand for biomass does not exceed the supply of what can be sustainably produced. And currently, we see that there is still a significant increase for biomass for energy, but also for materials. Therefore, we also need to ensure that the next round of bioeconomy policies will take that into account. This will be hence also one of the important aspects that will be looked at in the context of the update of the next bioeconomy strategy, how to deal with the potential biomass gap, how to offer consumers more sustainable circular bio-based products by also accelerating the circular economy approach within bioeconomy applications, but also scaling up the innovations which we already have as a result of 20 years of research and innovation, and ensuring that they are sustainable. We will launch in February or March a public consultation on this update of our EU bioeconomy strategy. I invite all of you to take part in that and share your views with us. And I'll stop here. Thanks very much. Back to you, Hermann.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter. Very nice. And I hope everyone starts to get the big picture here, why a food system transformation is necessary to make a bioeconomy sustainable, but also the role of a growing bioeconomy to enable the food system transformation. So I'll invite all the 4 speakers to the podium here. And yes, please. Everyone has a seat, all prepared? Yes. No, that's fine, I think. And you have to switch on your mic, I was told, when you use it. So I would like to engage in 2 rounds of a panel exchange here. and then we also take questions from the audience. So in the first round, let me put on the hat of my nephew, or your nephew, right? The farmers. I mean, we saw what is necessary to reach the global goals, what is feasible, what is economically beneficial even, but how do we convince the farmers to actually, well, engage or see the opportunities in this? Because I could imagine if a young farmer would have been here as planned, they would say, well, there's already too much bureaucracy going on with the current system. If I have a big dairy farm with a lot of grassland, you know, what do I do with all the grassland if we reduce consumption of livestock calories, for example, or if I want to engage in the bioeconomy? So where are the new value chains for new products? You know, so here I am as a farmer today. What can I actually do? And I would start with Harald on the left-hand side, maybe from the perspective of your EU study. So how do we convince the farmers to engage, because they have to play a very important role?
Yeah, thanks a lot. If we would have been here 1 year ago, that was the period of the farmers' protests. And I think we all learned we will do this with the farming sector, or we will not do this transformation, because that are the people going to do that. So turning such a transformation into economic opportunities for farmers probably is the most important thing. And I would see two main areas of action. One thing maybe sounds a little bit old-fashioned, but I would say it's not our fault, but the political process is so slow that one needs to repeat so lengthily, so often the same messages again. So therefore, they are not new anymore, but they're still true. And that is the message of public money for public goods. Because we know that farmers produce food, or they produce products for the bioeconomy, and they are rewarded at the market. And that is fine. But they also produce many other things, which we call as economists public goods, goods which are not easily sold on private markets. Biodiversity, negative emissions, animal welfare. And we are preaching the story of public money for public goods since long, and we are moving in that direction. I mean, you called it repurposing the subsidies, yeah? And it's good that we are moving in that direction, but we are only part of the way, if we look, for example, at the Common Agricultural Policy. So as a young farmer in Germany, or other EU countries, if I want to produce animal welfare, where are my economic opportunities? We don't have large-scale animal welfare payment schemes, and we know that this will only very, very partially be rewarded in the market. If a young farmer says, I understand that revetting of peatland is important, I'm ready to do it, but where is my economic opportunity? Well, we talk about paludiculture, but right now, paludiculture, there is not yet a market paying to the farmers. We talk about revetting premiums since long. We do not yet have revetting premiums at a reasonable scale. So even for a young and willing farmer to contribute to societal demands, the economic opportunity is not there, or very, very partially. And then we have the negative emissions, and we all talk about woody structures in agricultural landscapes, very, very true. But also there, we do not yet have large-scale payment schemes. So there's one, public money for public goods, and the other thing is developing markets. And there the bioeconomy policy, of course, is enormously important, that we price carbon in a way that it becomes attractive to produce biogenic carbon for the bioeconomy. And there we are in a transitional path. We are moving in that direction, and we need more incentives, and we need, until we have a proper carbon pricing, we need other complementary policies to get these sectors starting up. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Harald. Katharina, you had your last slide on, I mean, we had in FSEC, we had a big chunk of work on political economy, and you talked about new narratives, new alliances, and so on. Maybe you could allude a bit on the same issue, actually, how to get especially the farmers involved.
I think in a way, and I totally agree with what has been said before, but I think the key thing is how we do it. And perhaps that's one thing that we need to think about more in terms of, in general, a policy is designed, and then the question is like, how do we sell it? And I think instead, if we could actually say, how can we co-create this policy in a way which actually understands the needs of the farmers and responds to those needs? Obviously, there is a big steering part from, we know what needs to happen. But for example, I live in England, and England has used its amazing freedom from the EU to redesign its subsidies. And it has been highly unsuccessful, I would say, so far. In part because some of the things that people care for were not taken into account. So one thing is like if you know that there is your EU payment coming in regularly, and one thing is like if you're part of a project that gets renegotiated every time that the budget gets rediscussed, then people have no security. So how can they invest? Where is the predictability in the policy? And I think that those were, obviously there were good intentions in the redesign, but by not having the farmers at the table trying to design things, not understanding what they needed, big opportunities were lost. So I would really focus on, yes, we need these new tools, we need to create markets, we need to do the right forms of investment, but I would really emphasize we need to have the farmers at the table understands what are their concerns and address the bottlenecks that they face in this transformation.
Yeah, thank you. Bill, you presented another study, right? Very interesting. We use our computer modeling, we do scenarios, so it's like playing a big serious game, and we can show how the transformation could work and what the positive effects are very nicely. What's your take, and also from your report on, it's this phasing in, right? And the sequencing of steps to also enable the transformation for the people who are on the ground, who have to make the money, right? The farm has to stay profitable one way or the other. And that's, I think, a huge challenge for the implementation of those transformation scenarios.
Yeah, I think it's a really critical question, I think, really important question. And just to say from the outset that within the World Bank, I represent the Global Department for Agriculture and Food, and I really see farmers as our main clients and beneficiaries. So when we started on this work, when we set out on this, we did it with the idea of trying to help farmers first and foremost. And I think that in the report, the Recipe for a Livable Planet, I didn't have time to present it today. We have an entire chapter on the enabling environment, and we talk about inclusion and climate justice, but just a few points. First of all, I do think that farmers have to be provided positive incentives. In some ways, the services that farmers provide in terms of either reducing greenhouse gas emissions or sequestering carbon, it's really the ultimate public good, because 1 ton of CO2 emissions reduced or sequestered on a farm benefits the entire planet. Farmers cannot themselves reap all of those benefits, and so they should be rewarded for those kinds of services. There are a number of ways to do that. We talked about this idea of repurposing. Globally, governments spend around $660 billion every year on public support for agriculture. Much of that spending goes towards things that are not really increasing long-term productivity, and in some cases actually have negative effects on the environment. Subsidies for overusing fertilizers and fuels and things like that. So as I mentioned in my presentation, we think that at least a quarter to a third of those public expenditures could be repurposed. And we talk about repurposing because we don't want to reduce the support for farmers, but just use it in a better way, provide them with incentives to invest in planting trees, agroforestry, soil health, more sustainable water management, and these kinds of things that benefit the farmers and benefit society. Some of the things that I mentioned also actually are cost saving for farmers, and it just requires some awareness raising and training so that they understand how to take advantage of those. But we do firmly believe that farmers should receive concessional financing in order to be able to carry out these the mitigation services that are needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a nice segue to the EU policy level. And although, Peter, now you're at DG Research, but of course you spent many years in DG Agri and DG Klima and so on. So maybe you can pick a bit up on the things which were mentioned. But I especially liked your last slides on these new developments in the food processing sector, new products coming up, plant-based alternatives and so on. Maybe you can say a little bit more on, how can this be scaled up? Because many farmers are still waiting for the market at their door, at their farm gate, to appear, as Harald also said. But maybe also connect what the other colleagues said on policy instruments. Well, repurposing, I think, is a big issue at the EU level, or will be.
Herman, thank you. I will not pick up the invitation to turn this into a discussion on the common agriculture policy. But certainly it's correct wherever we have the possibilities to support and incentivize the provision of public goods. The available budget should be used to the extent possible, but also this is always a policy debate within the EU, but also within the member states, and you have to take all parties along in this. Maybe back to one of our nephews, just to indicate an example. My nephew has, for instance, converted from conventional farming, from conventional wine production to organic production, and this comes along with an incentive through also the public budget. So there are examples where provision of ecosystem services, where but also climate-friendly farming practices can be incentivized through our policy framework. But no question, we need more of these incentives, to reach or to also get to the low-hanging fruits that are there, and a lot needs to be done. And this is also why we are working, and you know that very well, in the EU, also on a carbon removal framework. We have adopted a regulation on this. Carbon cycles in agriculture, land use, forestry are complex. So we are trying to do this carefully. But I'm convinced that the incentivization of nature-based solutions, ecosystem services, climate mitigation measures at the farm level will continue. But the bioeconomy brings also in the innovation perspective, and there in the panel this morning, we also had a young farmer from Netherlands. Some of you will have heard and seen her, and she also made use of the opportunities to adopt innovation in another area. She simply is taking over a dairy farm and wanted to start a new business, and she has started with insects, which are utilizing waste streams, side streams, biomass side streams, and she's producing insects not for human consumption but for feed. And this is again for me a bioeconomy solution, because par excellence, because it substitutes, for instance, it can substitute protein imports in form of soybeans from abroad, which have contributed to deforestation. And this anti-causality chain, which you are also trying to show, is shown here in an example where also the farmer benefits by generating new income. So there are examples there, but they need to be scaled. They need to be developed further, and so this is why, we need to do much more work on this.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So in case you have questions, I would ask you to start to line up, please, at this mic. I'll take a brief second round, and then we'll take a few questions from the audience. Thank you. Maybe we can have a few brief points on this aspect of policy coherence. I mean, we talked a lot about that in FSEC, I'm sure in the other studies, because we see this complex framing, many things to be done, and it's not only about incentives in any single element or dimension of this transformation, but policies even have to be aligned, right? Which is really a challenge. And and we have several questions. So maybe, Katrina, maybe I can start with you. A few words how to achieve this, because last year we talked about reducing diesel fuel subsidies, and this is completely in a different line of thought to what we are talking about here, of course.
Well, on policy coherence, I think you used the expression, this whole government approach, and I think that that's really what is needed. And perhaps just, in very concrete terms, FSEC, one of the recommendations from FSEC is, for example, just to do an initial audit of food system policies, trying to map out who is actually taking decisions that are relevant for food systems and what are the key decisions that they take. So there are these lovely little maps where you see that there are 16 or 27 different government departments, depending on the country, depending on the structure, that are taking decisions relative to food systems. So as the first thing, taking stock of what you have, who's deciding and why, and then finding ways in which you can actually get the relevant people to be aligned. That can be a useful first step. But I'm terrified of the long queue of questions, so I feel like I can't talk anymore.
Maybe Harald, can I take you as a second thought on this coherence?
Very short, because I also see you lining up and there should be time for question. But one thing, I mean, the idea of policy coherence is based on the assumption that there is a coordinated, rational policy-making process. That's not always the case. And we are living in a democracy, so political parties need to serve their electorates. In more fragmented societies, these electorates are more fragmented. So parties may do certain things not for the long-term greater societal good, but just to ensure they will end up in office again. And therefore, you talked about new formats, Katrina, and I think the whole idea of having pre-parliamentary processes, stakeholder dialogues, citizen councils, just trying to reach a corridor of consensus on which then policymakers can build, because they can then say this is legitimized, the stakeholders agree, large parts of societies are ready to vote for that. Now we are translating that into long-term policy. I think we are part of the way in Germany. We had such stakeholder commissions. We had the Future Commission Agriculture. We had a commission on animal husbandry. We had a citizen council, and we see how difficult it obviously is for political parties to take that up. It's not yet, almost not translated into policy making. We have that also at the EU level, the strategic dialogue, also providing a corridor of consensus. Well, if you reach that, that's really great to have. And we can only hope for policymakers who are courageous enough to take such opportunities and translate that into actual policy making. Well, we hope for the new European Commission. The words of Christoph Hansen are promising. And in Germany, we have elections. And we will have a new government which will have the chance to translate these consensus papers. It was with the farmers' unions into actual policy making. I think that's a really important element in a democracy, that we try to reach consensus in society, not only in parliament, but also before.
Yes, thank you very much. So very good that we have several questions. So please state your name, who you are.
I'm René Lutz. I'm the co-founder of MyPills. We are a biotech company bringing the circular economy by implementing fungi technology. And I was coming to this panel because I thought you would be somebody from the private sector who is managing forests. But they did so great, amazing speeches. But in the end, I can tell you from the reality, I'm looking for now 3 years to find partners from the private sector in forestry. We found them in waste management. We are planning recycling parks. on them with farmers and so on that we want to use this. But I'm still looking for forest managers who are interested in innovation. For example, I had a government-owned...
sorry, can you make it short and then you ask the question?
My question is, first of all, it would be great to have people from the private sector here because they have to do this. And I can tell you, I talked to lords, princes, state-owned innovation managers, and they just say we're not interested in innovation. So can you give us the strategy where we can find these rare species of forest managers who really like to implement new technologies? Because I cannot find them. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you. I take a second question and then, whoever feels inclined to answer. Yes, please.
My name is Nasser Ehani. I'm passionate about food system transformation and bioeconomy, working as project coordinator and a scientist at Leibniz Institute for Agriculture Engineering and Bioeconomy. It's not far from here. My question goes directly to Peter, but other times feel free to reflect on what Peter answers or even on the question. We heard a very clear message that billions of dollars or euros is urgently needed for food system transformation. But this is something that policymakers always hear, that in energy sector, in security, in infrastructure, in health, in food and bioeconomy. So I wonder, how do you perceive such recommendations, and how, specifically I ask this question because the food and bioeconomy is cross-sectoral, and even talking about policy coherence, how do you handle the budget and finance coherence, and how do you put the threshold for an impactful transformation? Thank you. I try.
Thank you. I asked for short answers. Who wants to? Where are the forest owners, the innovative forest? Peter, do you know?
Well, I think we don't have here a startup event, but there are startup events for the bioeconomy. There was just one 4 weeks ago at Brussels Airport, and there will be more of these startup events also for a thriving bioeconomy. There was one last year in Reims, in Grand Est, where I could have connected you immediately with various forest managers, but you are right. It's not always easy to build up the supply chains, but also with the next commission, startups and support for startups will feature very prominently, are really an important aspect. On the second question, I would simply argue that we have developed in 2016 a Food 2030 research and innovation strategy, which is based on a systems approach. This is important. And we are trying to support the food systems transformation, specifically also through research and innovation, yeah? But not only on technology. We don't only want to provide technology fixes. We also invest into research and innovation on governing the food systems. We are have a project, for instance, which has initiated more sustainable governance of urban food systems. How can you bring the actors in big cities, in Milano, in Paris, together with the farmers around them? How can they better valorize the food waste that is created in cities? So governance is an important part of the research innovation we support, but I invite you to also have a look at our Food 2030 strategy, which gives a better impression how we really are trying to support in a holistic way research innovation on a transformation of the food system.
I don't know, Bill or Harald, on this question, where the money could come from?
Maybe we take 2 more questions such that the line is not wrong, and then I'm collecting, if that's fine. Because
okay, fine. Okay, let's take 2 more questions.
I'm organizing a conference called Adapt Your World, and the adaptation of climate resilience is what I want to ask you, because I like that you still have the hope on a politically rational process, but at the same time I want to say, look in the newspaper, and we know that we are in a different political world in the next years, and we don't have the time. So my question now is the change of the narrative necessary, or away from carbon reduction, decarbonization, net zero, to protect land, lives, and livelihoods as the key driver to motivate change. And that could also be a narrative that actually sticks in the political environment we're in.
Hello, my name is Veronika Vogel. I have a background in international agriculture and public policy. And then I would argue that for transformation of agriculture, we actually need a transformation of research, development, and extension as well. And so talking about more specialized solutions on a smaller scale, I would like to provide 2 examples from a field I'm familiar with in plant breeding. So currently we have 5 people at Silib breeding the vast majority of wheat available in India. A German example, we do not have a national strategy on plant genetic resources or plant breeding, so currently a lot of the crops we need in the future are not being bred for. And so my question would be, how could we adapt organizational capacities and policies in order to provide more specialized, efficient, small-scale solutions? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we basically have 5 minutes left, so we can go around the panel. Thank you very much for the questions. Of course, we could discuss easily another 2 hours on all these things. So Harald, please.
Yes, thank you. For not finding any innovative forest owner or manager, well, I think leave your phone number or your card with us. We can connect you. And B, I think it needs to come from both sides. If you really don't find somebody, then there may also be something with the idea. Yeah, because I'm sure that there are a lot of innovative people out. Not everybody. It's quite conservative sectors, but you will be able to find people with a good idea, I'm convinced. For the whole story of how do we frame the story, first the issue of the world is going low. We are in an enormous crisis. We have trillions of costs, or hundreds of trillions of costs. And in order to avoid these costs, we have to spend a lot of money. That may indeed not be the most attractive story to tell. What I personally like is to talk about opportunities we have. And if we want to reap the benefits lying in these opportunities, then we have to invest. And that's what we normally do. We negotiate as societies where we invest in order to reap the benefits in future. We don't discuss ending school education because we don't have money anymore. We all agreed that we need school education to later have kids becoming adults and running our societies and our economies. Yeah? So I think the story of opportunities and then investments to realize these opportunities, that's a story I personally like. You asked for the adaptation, and I think it's a crucial point. And now I say in our sectors, in the sectors of agriculture and forestry, the good news is that adaptation is good for mitigation. Yeah? And adaptation is a somewhat burned wording in other sectors because adaptation may sound like, well, who is adapting? Those who have the resources. So the rich people moving up the mountains, if the sea level rises. If that's adaptation, that doesn't make much sense. But in order for the agricultural sector to contribute to mitigation, we need to have productive systems. We need to have adapted plants. We need to do landscape water household management. So we need woody structures in the landscape. All that. So and I fully agree, and we are in such a process of reframing, say, making the adaptation important because that directly relates to people's lives' reality, and then talking about the opportunities of adaptation also for mitigation. Thanks.
Thank you. Bill, I don't know where to find the money for investing in these transformations.
Well, again, as I mentioned, there's this large pool of funds already spent globally on supporting agriculture, and part of it is a matter of using that in a smarter way to support sustainable food system transformation. And the young woman at the end who asked about research and development and extension, those are the kinds of things that we should be spending public resources on, especially when it's geared towards adaptation and mitigation and so on. In the agri-food system, I mean, there's also this huge pot of money out there for climate finance, something like 600 billion a year. But currently, the agri-food system, for various reasons, is getting an extremely small share of that. Over 90% of the climate finance today is for mitigation. The agri-food system is only getting 2% of that, despite being responsible for a third of the emissions. So we're trying to see how can we, help farmers access more of that concessional climate finance. I do think that can be part of the solution. In the World Bank. Already, historically, about 2/3 of our financing for climate-smart agriculture has been on the adaptation side, much less on the mitigation side. So, we're looking how can we scale up more on the mitigation side, and I think there's a lot of scope and need to do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Katrina. What's your story on upscaling and?
Yeah, upscaling. One thing that I think we haven't really touched upon is actually the opportunity offered by technology, not just in terms of innovation, but technology in support of different policies. So say, for example, apparently now the technology for sensors, there was actually in the panel last year, there was someone who was saying that finally in New Zealand, they're going to adopt these sensors at the farm level to measure the level of carbon in the soil. I think all these things open up a variety of new policy tools that give us hope, at least.
Yeah, last point to Peter on how can you support from the EU side, especially this, with innovation, it's like you have like pioneers and you find some success stories. That's the first step, but then how to roll this out to the full sector. I think that's then still another step, which is not so easy. And a short answer, please, to close.
The last two questions indeed address the role of research and innovation, and we do have at the EU level not only a common agriculture policy, we also have a joint research innovation instrument which is called Horizon Europe, and there we do develop specific solutions. And we have, for instance, a partnership for animal welfare. We have a partnership for agroecology. We have also launched recently, or with our new Horizon Europe framework program, also missions. And one of them is, for instance, addressing the point the second last person made, climate adaptation, really a big focal area on climate adaptation. The other focal point is mission, soils, healthy soils. And here we are reversing the logic of also how research innovation is done. We are not saying these are the topics, but we are creating what we call living labs, so that on the spot, together with stakeholders, research innovation solutions can be developed, and then they can be picked up through also the instruments we have in the Common Agriculture Policy, European Innovation Partnership for Agriculture is taking these specific solutions and is trying to bring them to the farmers. So we are trying our best to also develop more coherent policies, but certainly more can be done.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have at the end of our time. I hope we could create a bit of hope. It's just 17th of January, actually, early in the year, in difficult times. I hope this was useful. Please give first a big round of applause to our 4 speakers here. Yes, and thank you to all the teams behind it to organize this panel. Thanks to GFFA for giving the opportunity, and I wish you all a nice rest of the day at other good panels. Thank you.